The broken weapon, Sarah Chen, walked through the main doors of the Galactic Defense Academy carrying a rifle case that looked like it had been through 3 wars. The leather was cracked and faded. Metal corners were dented and scratched. Other human recruits turned to stare as she passed by. "What is that thing?" whispered Jake Martinez, pointing at Sarah's case. "Did she find it in a junkyard?" The other recruits laughed. They all carried shiny new weapon cases with electronic locks and climate control systems. Sarah's case looked like it belonged in a museum. Sarah found an empty bench in the equipment room and set down her case. She could feel dozens of eyes watching her. The laughter grew louder when she opened the case with an old-fashioned metal key. Inside lay what appeared to be a completely broken rifle. The wooden stock had deep cracks running through it. The metal barrel was bent at a strange angle. Pieces of the weapon seemed to be missing entirely. Even the scope was cracked and cloudy. "Oh no," said Amy Foster, shaking her head. "Sarah, you can't use that. It's completely destroyed." Instructor Vex approached Sarah's bench. The tall alien officer looked down at the broken weapon with his 4 compound eyes. His expression showed clear disappointment. "Cadet Chen," Instructor Vex said in his buzzing voice, "explain to me why you brought garbage to my academy." Sarah looked up at the instructor calmly. "Sir, this rifle belonged to my grandfather. It has never failed me." "Never failed you?" Instructor Vex laughed, a sound like metal scraping against metal. "This weapon appears to be completely non-functional. The barrel is bent. The stock is cracked. How could it possibly work?" Sarah reached into the case and carefully lifted the rifle. The moment her hands touched the weapon, something impossible happened. The other recruits stopped laughing and started staring. The cracks in the wooden stock began to close by themselves. The bent barrel slowly straightened with soft clicking sounds. Missing pieces materialized from nowhere and clicked into place. The cloudy scope cleared until it was perfectly transparent. Within seconds, Sarah held a beautiful, perfectly maintained rifle. The weapon gleamed with an inner light that no one could explain. The equipment room fell completely silent. Even Instructor Vex's compound eyes widened in shock. Sarah smiled slightly and checked the rifle's action. It moved smooth as silk. She looked around at the amazed faces surrounding her. "Like I said, sir, it has never failed me." 3 days after the equipment inspection, all recruits reported to the Academy's shooting range. Sarah carried her rifle in the same old case, but now everyone watched her with curious eyes instead of laughter. "Today we test your marksmanship skills," announced Sergeant Blake, a grizzled human veteran. "Targets at 200, 400, and 800 meters. 10 shots each distance. Begin when ready." The other recruits activated their plasma rifles and energy weapons. Bright displays lit up, showing wind speed, temperature, and target distance. Computer targeting systems hummed to life. Sarah found a position at the end of the firing line. She opened her case and lifted out her rifle. The weapon looked exactly as it had after the strange transformation, perfect and gleaming. Jake Martinez sat up next to her with his advanced laser rifle. "Sarah, where's your targeting computer? How do you calculate wind drift?" Sarah loaded a single bullet into her rifle. "I don't need computers. That's impossible," said Amy Foster, from 2 positions down. "My weapon can track 12 variables simultaneously. No human can do those calculations manually." Sarah lay down on the shooting mat and looked through her simple scope. No digital displays. No computer readouts. Just clear glass and metal crosshairs. The first targets appeared at 200 meters. Energy weapons around her began firing immediately. Bright bolts of light streaked downrange, most missing the moving targets. Sarah aimed at her target and squeezed the trigger. Nothing happened. No flash of light. No sound, no recoil. The rifle didn't even seem to fire. "Weapon malfunction," called Instructor Vex from behind the firing line. "Cadet Chen, check your rifle." But 200 meters downrange, Sarah's target exploded into pieces. Everyone stopped firing and stared. The electronic scoreboards showed Sarah with a perfect bullseye, but no sensors had detected any shot from her position. How is that possible? Whispered Jake. The acoustic sensors didn't pick up any gunfire. Sarah loaded another round. The second target appeared at 400 meters, moving in an unpredictable pattern. Again, she aimed and pulled the trigger. Again, no sound, no flash, no visible projectile. The distant target shattered instantly. Sergeant Blake walked over to Sarah's position with a confused expression. Cadet Chen, what type of ammunition are you using? Sarah showed him the cartridge. It looked like a normal bullet, nothing special or unusual. Standard lead projectile, she said quietly. That's impossible, said Instructor Vex, checking his instruments. Our sensors detect no muzzle blast, no sonic signature. Your rifle appears to be firing nothing at all. The 800-meter targets appeared, tiny dots in the distance that were barely visible through normal scopes. Sarah breathed slowly and squeezed the trigger a third time. 800 meters away, the target disappeared in a shower of fragments. The entire firing line fell silent. Even the advanced alien weapons had struggled to hit targets at that distance. Amy Foster checked her rifle's computer display. My targeting system can't even acquire the 800-meter targets clearly. How did you hit it with no computer assistance? Sarah packed her rifle back into its case. My grandfather taught me that the best technology is the kind that works when everything else fails. Sergeant Blake stared at the distant targets, then back at Sarah's ancient-looking rifle. Cadet Chen, I've been training shooters for 30 years. I've never seen anything like this. Sarah closed her case and stood up. Sir, the rifle has been in my family for a very long time. It knows what it needs to do. As she walked away, the other recruits exchanged worried glances. Something was very wrong with Sarah's weapon. Or maybe something was very right. Marcus Webb couldn't sleep. For 3 nights, he had been thinking about Sarah's rifle and the impossible shooting demonstration. As an engineering student, he needed to understand how the weapon worked. At 2:17 a.m., Marcus slipped out of his dorm room and crept down the hallway towards Sarah's quarters. The academy was quiet except for the hum of life support systems. Emergency lighting cast long shadows on the walls. He stopped outside Sarah's door and listened. Soft breathing from inside told him she was asleep. Marcus pulled out his electronic lockpicker, a device that could open any door in the academy. The lock clicked open after 30 seconds. Marcus stepped into Sarah's room, holding his breath. Sarah lay sleeping on her narrow bed, her rifle case sitting on the desk nearby. The case was unlocked. Moving as quietly as possible, Marcus approached the desk. His hands trembled as he lifted the lid of the case. Inside, Sarah's rifle lay in perfect condition. Just as it had appeared after the mysterious transformation, Marcus reached out to touch the weapon. The moment his fingers made contact with the rifle's stock, burning cold shot through his hand. It felt like touching ice made of fire. He jerked his hand back with a gasp of pain. Sarah's eyes snapped open. For one terrifying moment, Marcus saw something impossible. Sarah's eyes were glowing with the same strange light he had seen in her rifle during the transformation. Symbols appeared along the rifle's barrel, ancient markings that pulsed with inner fire. Get away from it. Her voice carrying an odd echo. Marcus stumbled backward, clutching his frozen hand against his chest. The symbols on the rifle grew brighter, and he could swear he heard whispers in a language that didn't sound human. Sarah, what is that thing? Marcus asked, his voice shaking. Sarah sat up slowly. The glow faded from her eyes, and the symbols on the rifle disappeared. She looked like a normal human again. But Marcus could still feel the wrongness in the air. It's my grandfather's rifle, she said quietly. I told you that already. That's not just a rifle, Marcus said, backing toward the door. Normal weapons don't burn people. Normal weapons don't have glowing symbols. What are you really carrying? Sarah stood up and walked to her rifle case. When she touched the weapon, it seemed to calm down, like a dangerous animal recognizing its master. The rifle has been in my family for 7 generations, Sarah said, not looking at Marcus. Each generation, one person is chosen to carry it. Each generation, they wait. Wait for what? Sarah finally met his eyes. In the dim light, Marcus thought he could still see traces of that strange glow. For the day when it's needed, she said. My grandfather told me that day would come during my lifetime. He said I would know when the time was right. Marcus felt ice in his stomach. Sarah, you're scaring me. What kind of weapon needs to wait for something? What is it supposed to do? Sarah closed the rifle case with a soft click. I don't know everything yet, but I know enough to tell you this. Never touch it again. The rifle chooses who can handle it. If you try to touch it again, it might not just burn you, it might kill me. Sarah nodded slowly. It has killed people before. People who tried to take it from my family. People who didn't understand what they were dealing with. Marcus reached for the door handle with his good hand. His burned fingers still throbbed with cold fire. Sarah, maybe you should tell the instructors about this. If that weapon is dangerous, no, Sarah said firmly. The instructors wouldn't understand. They would try to study it, try to take it apart. The rifle doesn't like being studied by strangers. Marcus opened the door, desperate to get away from whatever was in that room. Marcus, Sarah called softly as he stepped into the hallway. Don't tell anyone about tonight, for your own safety. Marcus hurried back to his room, cradling his burned hand. As he closed his door, he could have sworn he heard whispers following him down the hall. He spent the rest of the night awake, staring at his hand. The burn mark looked like ancient symbols branded into his skin. Marcus decided he would never go near Sarah Chen or her rifle again. 2 weeks after Marcus's midnight encounter, the Academy began advanced combat simulations. The holographic training room could create any battlefield, alien worlds, space stations, even underwater combat zones. Sarah entered the simulation chamber with her squad of 6 recruits. The room transformed around them into a war-torn city with burning buildings and enemy soldiers hiding behind concrete barriers. This is a rescue mission, announced the computer voice. Civilians are trapped in the central building. Eliminate hostile forces and extract the targets. The other recruits activated their energy weapons. Targeting displays lit up, showing enemy positions in red. The simulation looked perfectly real. Sarah could smell smoke and feel heat from the fires. Stay in formation, ordered squad leader Torres. Use your targeting computers to identify threats. Sarah raised her rifle and looked through her scope, but something was wrong. Through her scope, she could see things that weren't supposed to be there. Dark shapes moved between buildings, creatures that looked like shadows with teeth. They weren't part of the simulation. Sarah was certain of that because her rifle was humming with the same energy she had felt during the midnight incident. Contact left, called Torres, firing at a holographic enemy soldier. Sarah squeezed her trigger, aiming at one of the shadow creatures only she could see. The rifle roared. Not the silent firing from the range, but a thunderous crack that shook the entire simulation chamber. A real bullet struck the wall behind the holographic enemies, sending concrete fragments flying. The other recruits dove for cover. Cease fire, shouted Torres. Chen, what are you doing? You're firing live rounds. Sarah stared at her rifle in shock. The weapon was supposed to fire harmless training beams in simulation mode, but her rifle was shooting real ammunition. Safety protocol failure, announced the computer. Live weapons detected. Simulation suspended. But Sarah's rifle kept humming with power. Through her scope, more shadow creatures appeared. They were climbing out of the ground, emerging from walls, dropping from the ceiling. Can't you see them? Sarah whispered, tracking one of the creatures with her rifle. See what? Asked Amy Foster, looking around nervously. Sarah fired again. Another real bullet punched through the simulation wall. But where the bullet hit, one of the shadow creatures screamed and dissolved. The simulation chamber's safety systems activated. Red lights flashed and alarms blared. Emergency barriers dropped from the ceiling to protect the other recruits. All personnel evacuate immediately, the computer commanded. Weapons malfunction detected. But Sarah couldn't stop. More shadow creatures were pouring into the simulation. They moved toward her squad mates, who couldn't see them coming. They're going to kill you, Sarah said, firing rapidly at targets no one else could see. Each shot hit empty air according to the sensors, but Sarah watched shadow creatures die with every bullet. Sarah, stop. Torres grabbed her shoulder. There's nothing there. Sarah spun around. Torres's hand passed right through one of the shadow creatures standing behind him. The creature raised claws, made of darkness, toward Torres's neck. Sarah put her rifle barrel against the creature's chest and pulled the trigger. The bullet passed through Torres without harming him and destroyed the shadow creature. But to everyone else, Sarah had just shot at her squad leader. Security to Simulation Chamber 4, Torres called into his radio. We have a cadet having some kind of breakdown. Sarah lowered her rifle, breathing heavily. The shadow creatures were gone, but she could still feel them watching from somewhere beyond sight. I was protecting you, she said quietly. Security guards rushed into the chamber, but they stopped when they saw the bullet holes in the walls. The simulation system couldn't explain how live ammunition had appeared in a training exercise. Instructor Vex arrived with a team of technicians. They scanned Sarah's rifle with every instrument they had. The weapon shows no electronic signature, reported the chief technician. It's not connected to our systems in any way. We can't control it or monitor it. Vex studied the bullet holes. Cadet Chen, your weapon fired real ammunition during a simulation. How is that possible? Sarah looked around at the concerned faces surrounding her. She could see fear in their eyes, not fear of her rifle, but fear of her. My rifle doesn't follow your rules, she said. It follows its own. That night, Sarah sat in her room staring at her rifle. The weapon lay quietly in its case, but she could sense it waiting for the shadow creatures to return. Because Sarah knew they would return. The simulation had been just the beginning. Professor. Kepler knocked on Sarah's door 3 days after the simulation incident. The old xenorchaeologist carried a thick folder of research papers and looked deeply troubled. Cadet Chen, I need to speak with you about your rifle, he said when Sarah opened the door. Sarah hesitated. After the simulation failure, most people at the academy avoided her. Some thought she was dangerous. Others thought she was crazy. What about it, Professor? Kepler entered her room and set his folder on her desk. I've been studying the symbols that appeared on your weapon. I've seen them before. Sarah felt cold. Where? Kepler opened his folder and spread out photographs of ancient ruins. The images showed massive stone structures on dead worlds, temples, monuments, and walls covered in strange markings. These ruins are scattered across 12 different star systems, Kepler explained. All of them belong to civilizations that destroyed themselves over 10,000 years ago. And all of them have these same symbols? Sarah looked at the photographs. The symbols were identical to the ones that had appeared on her rifle during Marcus's midnight visit. What do the symbols mean? Sarah asked. That's what worries me, Kepler said, pulling out more photos. Every civilization that used these symbols ended the same way. Total destruction. Entire planets turned to ash. Billions of people dead. Sarah sat down heavily on her bed. Professor, you're scaring me. I should scare you, Kepler said firmly. Because I don't think your rifle is just a weapon, Sarah. I think it's a key. A key to what? Kepler showed her a final photograph. It was a stone carving that depicted creatures made of shadow attacking a city while warriors fought. Back with weapons that looked exactly like Sarah's rifle. A key to something that was locked away for good reason, Kepler said. The last civilization to use these weapons called them void breakers. They were designed to fight enemies from another dimension, the same shadow. Creatures you saw in the simulation. Sarah's hands trembled as she studied the carving. The shadow creatures in the stone looked identical to the ones she had fought. But here's the terrible part, Kepler continued. According to the texts we've translated, the void breakers didn't just fight the shadow creatures. Using them opened permanent doorways between dimensions. The more the weapons were used, the more shadow creatures could enter our reality. So my rifle is making things worse? The civilizations that used these weapons all made the same mistake, Kepler said. They thought they were defending themselves. But each battle brought more enemies through the dimensional barriers. Eventually, the shadow creatures overwhelmed them completely. Sarah looked at her rifle case. The weapon sat quietly, but she could sense it listening to their conversation. Professor, if this is true, why did my family keep the rifle? Why pass it down through generations? Kepler closed his folder. because someone has to guard it. Someone has to make sure it's never used unless absolutely necessary. Your family weren't warriors, Sarah. They were guardians. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed thinking about Professor Kepler's warning. But at 3:17 a.m., her rifle began to hum. Sarah sat up and looked at the weapon. Soft light pulsed along its barrel in a steady rhythm like a heartbeat. Then she heard the voice. It came from deep space, carried on radio frequencies that shouldn't exist. The voice spoke in a language she didn't recognize, but somehow she understood every word. "Guardian," the voice whispered across the void. "We are coming home." Sarah grabbed her rifle. The weapon was warm to her touch, and the symbols appeared along its length, glowing brighter than ever before. "The seals are weakening," the voice continued. "The barriers grow thin. Soon we will walk among you again, as we did in the ancient times." Sarah ran to her window and looked out at the stars. Deep in space, she could see new lights moving between the constellations. Ships that traveled faster than anything should be possible. "Your ancestors imprisoned us in the shadow realm," the voice said, growing stronger. "But we have learned patience. We have learned to wait. And now, the time of waiting is over." The lights in space grew brighter. They were definitely getting closer. Sarah clutched her rifle and whispered, "Grandfather, what did you leave me?" The voice from space laughed, a sound like breaking glass and dying stars. "He left you a choice, Guardian. Fight us and open the way for our armies to pour through, or lay down your weapon and watch your species die quickly." Sarah realized the horrible truth. Her rifle wasn't meant to stop the shadow creatures. It was meant to decide how humanity would face its destruction. At 6:42 a.m., every deep space monitoring station in the solar system detected the same impossible reading. Objects were approaching Earth at speeds that broke every law of physics. Admiral Hayes burst into the Academy's command center, carrying urgent reports from 12 different observatories. Her face was pale with fear. "We have a problem," she announced to the assembled instructors. "Something is coming toward Earth." Multiple objects. Moving at 300 times light speed, Instructor Vex studied the sensor data on his display screen. "That's impossible. Nothing can travel that fast. The objects are decelerating," Admiral Hayes continued. "At their current rate, they'll reach Earth orbit in 18 hours. Sarah felt her rifle case vibrating in her dorm room 3 floors above the command center. She ran downstairs and found the hallways filled with panicked cadets and instructors. "Sarah," called Marcus Webb as she passed. Despite his fear of her rifle, he looked desperate for answers. "Is this connected to your weapon?" Sarah didn't answer. She could feel her rifle pulling her toward the command center like a magnet drawing metal. She pushed through the crowds and entered the command room. Admiral Hayes was showing holographic displays of the approaching objects to the senior staff. "The energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases," Admiral Hayes explained. "They don't match any known alien technology." Sarah approached the display and immediately recognized what she was seeing. The ships looked exactly like the shadow creatures from her visions long. Dark vessels that seemed to bend light around themselves. "Admiral," Sarah said quietly, "those ships are coming for my rifle." Everyone in the command center turned to stare at her. Admiral Hayes looked confused. "Cadet Chen, what are you talking about?" Sarah opened her rifle case. The weapon was glowing so brightly that it hurt to look at directly. The ancient symbols covered every inch of the barrel, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. "They spoke to me last night," Sarah said. "The beings in those ships, they said they were coming home." Professor Kepler pushed through the crowd. "Admiral, the cadet is telling the truth. Her rifle is connected to those ships somehow." "That's ridiculous," Admiral Hayes said. "How could an old Earth weapon be connected to alien vessels?" The main display screen suddenly filled with static. Then a voice came through the speakers, the same voice Sarah had heard in her room. "People of Earth," the voice said in perfect English. "We have returned to reclaim what was stolen from us long ago." The static cleared, revealing a creature that made everyone in the room step backward. It looked like a shadow given form, tall, thin, with eyes like burning stars. 10,000 years ago, your ancestors used weapons of great power to banish us from this dimension. They called us evil. They called us invaders. But this was our home first. Sarah's rifle grew even brighter. She could barely hold it without burning her hands. "We have watched your species grow," the creature continued. "We have waited patiently for the Guardian bloodline to produce a new keeper of the Void Breaker weapons. And now that time has come." The creature's burning eyes seemed to look directly at Sarah through the screen. "Guardian, you have two choices. Use your weapon to fight us and create the dimensional rifts we need to bring our full army through. Or surrender the weapon willingly, and we will make your species end quick and painless." Admiral Hayes drew her sidearm. "Is that a threat?" The creature laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Look at your instruments, Admiral. See how many ships approach your world." The tactical display updated. Instead of a dozen ships, the sensors now showed thousands. The entire solar system was surrounded by shadow vessels. "We are not making threats," the creature said. "We are offering mercy. The Guardian's weapon is the key to our dimensional prison. Whether she uses it to fight us or gives it to us willingly, it will serve our purpose." Sarah realized the horrible trap her family had carried for generations. The rifle was never meant to protect Earth. It was meant to ensure that when the shadow creatures returned, they could complete their invasion. "But there is a third choice," the creature said, its voice growing softer. "The Guardian can destroy the weapon and herself with it. This would deny us our key, but would also leave your species defenseless against our conventional assault." The command center fell silent. Everyone looked at Sarah, waiting for her decision. Sarah stared at her glowing rifle. Three choices, all of them leading to humanity's destruction. Fight and open the dimensional doorways. Surrender and die quickly. Destroy the weapon and die slowly. "How long do I have to decide?" Sarah asked. "Our fleet will be in orbit in 17 hours, the creature replied. "Choose wisely, Guardian. The fate of two dimensions rests in your hands." The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Sarah looked around at the frightened faces surrounding her. These people were depending on her to save them, but her weapon offered only different ways to die. Unless there was a fourth choice her grandfather had never told her about. 16 hours later, the Shadow Fleet arrived in Earth's orbit. Every defense satellite went dark the moment the alien ships entered the solar system. Earth's most advanced weapons simply stopped working. Sarah stood in the Academy's observatory watching thousands of dark vessels surround her homeworld. Her rifle had grown so bright that she needed special glasses to look at it. "All conventional weapons are offline," reported Admiral Hayes over the intercom. "Energy shields, plasma cannons, missile systems, everything electronic has been disabled." But Sarah's rifle hummed with more power than ever before. Sarah called Professor Kepler as he entered the observatory. "I found something in the ancient texts. There might be another way." Sarah turned to face him. "What do you mean?" Kepler spread ancient stone rubbings across the table. "The last civilization to fight these creatures left a message. They said the Voidbreaker weapons have two modes, destruction and creation. Creation. The weapons weren't originally designed to fight the shadow creatures," Kepler explained. "They were designed to build dimensional barriers. To lock the shadow realm permanently." Sarah felt her rifle pulse with agreement. "So I can seal them away instead of fighting them." "According to this, yes. But the power required would be enormous. The weapon would need to draw energy from the user's life force." Sarah understood immediately. Using the rifle's creation mode would kill her, but it might save everyone else. The observatory's communication system crackled to life. The shadow creature's voice filled the room. "Guardian, your time has expired. Our ships are in position. Surrender the weapon now, or we begin the slaughter." Sarah picked up her rifle. The moment her hands touched it, the weapon began changing. The stock extended and new components materialized from thin air. Ancient symbols covered every surface, glowing like small suns. "There is a fourth choice," Sarah said quietly. Through the observatory's windows, she could see the Shadow Fleet moving into attack formation. Lightning crackled between the alien ships as they prepared their weapons. Sarah aimed her transformed rifle at the largest shadow vessel and pulled the trigger. But instead of firing a bullet, the weapon released a wave of golden light that spread across space like ripples in a pond. Where the light touched the shadow ships, they began to slow down, as if moving through thick liquid. "Impossible," came the creature's voice over the radio. "The weapon cannot be used in creation mode. No Guardian has ever survived the power drain." Sarah felt the rifle pulling energy from her body. Her vision blurred and her hands shook, but she kept the trigger pressed. More golden light poured from the weapon, forming a complex pattern in space around Earth. The light began, weaving itself into barriers, walls of pure energy that separated dimensions. "She is sealing the dimensional rifts," the creature said, its voice filled with panic. "Stop her. All ships, fire on the Guardian." Thousands of shadow vessels turned their weapons toward Earth, but their energy beams couldn't penetrate the golden barriers Sarah was creating. "The barriers are too strong," reported one of the shadow creatures. "She is cutting us off from our home dimension." Sarah collapsed to her knees, but kept her finger on the trigger. The rifle was consuming her life force to power the dimensional walls, but the barriers were almost complete. "Sarah, stop." Admiral Hayes burst into the observatory. "You're killing yourself." "It's the only way," Sarah gasped. Her hair was turning white and her skin was aging rapidly. "The barriers will hold for 1,000 years. Maybe longer." The golden light reached critical intensity. The dimensional walls slammed shut around the Shadow Fleet, trapping them in normal space where they could be fought with conventional weapons. "No!" screamed the creature's voice as the barriers locked into place. "We are cut off from our power source. The dimensional rifts are sealed." Sarah's rifle went silent. The weapon crumbled to dust in her hands, its power finally exhausted. Sarah fell forward, her body aged and weak from the energy drain. But she was alive. Professor Kepler knelt beside her. "Sarah, how are you still breathing?" "The ancient text said using creation mode was always fatal." Sarah smiled weakly. "My grandfather left me one more secret. The rifle wasn't just a weapon. It was a test." "A test?" "To see if someone would choose to create instead of destroy. To choose sacrifice instead of victory. The weapon gives back the life force of everyone who made the right choice before me." Through the observatory windows, they could see Earth's defense fleet powering back up. With the dimensional barriers in place, human weapons worked normally again. The shadow creatures were trapped in normal space, cut off from their home dimension. They could be defeated now. Sarah had found the fourth choice her grandfather never told her about, not destruction, but transformation. Not fighting the enemy, but removing their advantage. The rifle was gone, but its purpose was complete. The Guardian's bloodline could finally rest. Earth was safe. 6 months after the dimensional barrier sealed the shadow creatures in normal space. Earth had won the war. The trapped alien fleet, cut off from their power source, surrendered after a brief conventional battle. Sarah Chen sat in the Academy's memorial garden, watching new cadets practice with their energy weapons. Her hair had returned to its natural black color, and the age lines from the rifle's power drain had faded. She looked like a normal 20-year-old again, but she felt much older. "The Galactic Council wants to interview you again," said Admiral Hayes, approaching Sarah's bench. "They're still trying to understand what happened." Sarah smiled sadly. "I've told them everything I know. The rifle is gone. The dimensional barriers will hold for centuries. The shadow creatures can't return to their home dimension. But how did your family know this would happen? How did they prepare for a threat that wouldn't arrive for generations?" Sarah touched the empty space where her rifle case used to sit. "My grandfather left me a letter. I found it in his things after the battle." She pulled out a worn envelope and showed Admiral Hayes the letter inside. He wrote that every Guardian family across the galaxy carried a piece of the solution. "My rifle was just one part of a larger puzzle. When the time came, all the pieces would come together. Other families? Other rifles? 12 families on 12 different worlds," Sarah read from the letter. "Each carrying a voidbreaker weapon. Each waiting for the signal to activate their part of the dimensional prison." Admiral Hayes sat down beside Sarah. So when you created the barriers around Earth, you triggered the other Guardians too? Sarah nodded. The dimensional walls are connected across all 12 worlds. The shadow creatures are trapped in a prison that spans multiple star systems. Even if they break free from one world, the other barriers will hold them. A young cadet ran past them, carrying a plasma rifle and laughing with his friends. Sarah watched him with mixed emotions. Do you ever regret it? Admiral Hayes asked. Given up the rifle? Ending your family's legacy? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. The legacy wasn't about carrying the weapon. It was about being ready to let it go. Professor Kepler joined them in the garden, carrying his usual stack of research papers. Sarah, I've been studying the dimensional barriers you created. They're more complex than we initially realized. What do you mean? The barriers aren't just prison walls, Kepler explained. They're learning systems. They adapt and strengthen themselves over time. In a few hundred years, they'll be impossible to break. Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. So the shadow creatures will never escape? Better than that, Kepler said excitedly. The barriers are teaching them, showing them how to exist in normal space without consuming other dimensions. The shadow creatures might eventually become peaceful neighbors instead of invaders. Admiral Hayes looked skeptical. You think they can change? According to our communication attempts, some of them are already changing, Kepler replied. They're learning to create instead of destroy. The barriers are transforming them just like they transformed the situation. Sarah stood up and walked to the edge of the garden. Below them, the Academy's training grounds buzzed with activity. Cadets from dozens of species practiced together, learning to protect the galaxy. There's something else, Sarah said, turning back to her friends. I've been having dreams. What kind of dreams? Admiral Hayes asked, concerned. Not nightmares, Sarah said quickly. Good dreams. I see other worlds where guardian families are teaching their children new things. Not how to carry weapons, but how to build bridges between species. How to solve problems without fighting. Kepler nodded thoughtfully. The guardian bloodlines aren't disappearing. They're evolving. Into what? Peacemakers, Sarah said with certainty. My grandfather's letter mentioned it. He said the rifles were just the beginning. The real work would start after the weapons were gone. A young girl ran up to Sarah, Amy Foster's little sister. Visiting the academy for the day, are you the lady who saved everyone? The girl asked with wide eyes. Sarah knelt down to the girl's level. I'm just someone who made a choice. What kind of choice? Sarah smiled. I chose to trust that there was always a better way than fighting. As the girl ran back to her sister, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since her grandfather's death. Complete peace. The rifle was gone, but its true purpose lived on. Not in weapons or warfare, but in the idea that even impossible problems could be solved with wisdom and sacrifice. The guardian bloodlines would continue, but their vigil was different now. Instead of waiting for threats to emerge, they would work to prevent them. Instead of carrying weapons, they would carry hope. Sarah Chen walked back toward the academy, ready to begin her new life as a teacher. Her students would learn more than marksmanship and tactics. They would learn that sometimes the greatest victory comes from choosing not to fight. The rifle's secret had never been about destruction at all. It had always been about finding another way. And now, finally, the galaxy was ready to learn that lesson.